Thank you. Thank you very much. It's so nice to be speaking at one of these events so close to home, as opposed to Athabasca or lots of the other places we've been running around the province in. So it's nice to talk to friends and neighbors. So thank you for the welcome, and pleasure to see so many of you out. Thank you. And I'd also like to thank all of the previous speakers, and I'd like to thank Rob for his remarks, and I'd like to thank him for all the work that went into the Free Alberta strategy. But I guess my question for the room and my question for Rob is that strategy seems to be very predicated on the Alberta legislature being able to do the right thing. After the last 2 years, who in this room trusts our legislature to act appropriately? So one of the reasons that I'm involved in the APP project is out of a desire for very deep constitutional reform in the province of Alberta, within Alberta. I'm a fifth-generation Albertan. My grandmother was delivered by a Cree midwife in 1896, not very far from Fort Saskatchewan. I have very deep ties to this province. And when I wake up and see what this province is being turned into through the misuse and misapplication of the Westminster parliamentary system, I'm literally sick to my stomach. What we're dealing with, and we've been dealing with it throughout in all of the litigation that we've been going through. I see my good friend and colleague, Mr. Gray's here, Leighton Gray's here, so thank you for coming, Leighton. Are two really disturbing words that are at the heart of all of the problems we're having, both with regard to that boil that we've just removed from the butt of Alberta politics, and with regard to Skippy Castro in Ottawa. And the two words that are so problematic are parliamentary privilege and parliamentary sovereignty. So there's this idea deeply rooted in the Westminster system of government that it's parliaments that are sovereign and they're sovereign over us. And there's this idea that somehow or other that we are subjects and we are the subjects of Parliament. And at the end of the day, that it is Parliament's will and it is Parliament's privileges that take precedence over our individual rights, including our property rights. That has to change. From my perspective, the only way that that can happen is with fundamental reform, which can only come from Alberta following what I consider at this point to be the simplest path forward, which is for 50% plus one of us to vote on a clear question as being circulated on the petition by APP to leave Canada. Now, to be clear, I'm not a separatist. When I read Rob's work that the Freedom Strategy put together, and I think there's a lot of great ideas in there, but there's a reference in there that made me chuckle because they were referring to a lot of us as separatist cousins. Well, to be clear, I'm not a separatist. I'm an Albertan, right? And for any of you who are watching that disgusting display going on in Parliament where person after person, including socialist members of Parliament from Edmonton, called our friends and neighbors every name in the book, racist, misogynist, ignorant, on and on and on, every name that they could come up with. Well, all of that was going on. It became really clear to me that Alberta doesn't need to separate from Canada. Canada has already separated from Alberta. And that's why, on a going forward basis, where there's a lot of great ideas that are coming out of the work of groups like, the Freedom Strategy that should be embraced. If we're talking about Bill 1 in the next election, Bill 1 should be the Alberta Referendum Act to have a referendum and just test the waters. I mean, Quebec's had several referendums. We don't need to have one, but let's find out once and for all how many of us are fed up enough to vote to leave Canada, right? Or really, to just acknowledge what in fact is is what I consider to be the fact now, which is that Canada has left us. So, what we need to do is to have that vote. And I look around this room, we're all adults, right? And I'm happy to see some children here today, but let's face it, right? We're allowed to make our own decisions, and we're allowed to express our own opinions. And I think the first thing that we should be able to do following the election of the next government is for that government to take the temperature of this province and find out how many of us are so fed up with the current status quo that they are prepared to vote to give effect to Canada separating from Alberta. Because God knows, after the last 2 years of living under a medical dictatorship in this province, we have all had enough. And again, from my perspective, that starts with reforming what's going on in Edmonton. Heaven forbid that we have a socialist government elected, in a true socialist government elected in Alberta, as opposed to the quasi-socialist government that we've been operating under for the last couple of years, where we have the premier deferring to dictator Hinshaw, and then dictator Hinshaw saying in court, well, I'm not really the dictator, I'm being told what to do by dictator Kenny in the cabinet, with everybody pointing fingers at one another, trying to pretend that nobody's responsible for the misery that we've been going through. What we really need to do is to come up with as step one, and I think in Rob's plan, it's step 5, the development of a constitution of the province of Alberta. What APP is committed to as step 1, along with the referendum, is developing an Alberta constitution. And from an APP perspective, that constitution is going to be Republican in nature. We are no longer going to have an elected dictatorship in Ottawa where we have a premier huddling over drinks on a rooftop with 5 of his closest friends, deciding on what they're going to do to us next. Right? We're going to have a true constitution with an elected Senate, an elected legislature, a separately elected executive, and 30 years ago, if you'd asked me if I'd ever say this out loud, whether I would, as a young lawyer, whether I would have ever agreed with this, I'll tell you no. But I think it's time for an elected judiciary as well. Because clearly, and again, this is part of what Leighton and I have been battling in court, and I'm sure Rob's been battling in court as well with regard to issues in and around Section 1. Another board that I sit on is the board of Taking Back Our Freedoms with Brian Peckford. And of course, Brian Peckford's view, exactly, founding father of the Canadian Constitution Act 1982, Peckford's view, in my submission, is correct that Section 1 was only meant to apply in times of the most dire national emergency. And I'm sorry, people who are already dying of 4 or 5 different things, getting a really bad cold bug, which is what a coronavirus is, and dying from that, along with the 4 or 5 other things that they're dying from, doesn't amount to a national emergency. It should not have empowered our governments to strip us of our liberties, lock us in our homes, tell us how many friends we're allowed to have at Christmas, or any of the other foolishness that we've been dealing with. So, in my view, we need to develop a system in Alberta, a system of governance that has far more checks and balances than the current system of government. Like, no more, should we be seeing drone footage, obviously probably supplied by the NDP, maybe it was Brian Jean, who knows, but seeing, the premier huddled with his 5 only friends in the province over bottles on top of the Sky Palace, figuring out what they're going to do to us next. Enough is enough. We need an actual system of government in this province that respects the rights of Albertans as citizens and provide sufficient checks and balances to all of us that we feel comfortable that we're not going to accidentally wake up one day in a province being run by a medical dictatorship being fed talking points by the World Economic Forum. So for me, that's why I'm involved, and that's why I'm volunteering my time and taking time away from my adorable 11-year-old daughter on a Saturday, because this is important. I think this is important to all of our children's future. And the other thing that I want to keep, people to keep in mind, usually I get to follow Dennis, and Dennis does a really nice talk about, like imagine us all in a canoe on the Niagara River, and we're heading to Niagara Falls. And there's one point in that trip where if we all get together and paddle as hard as we can and all work together, we can make it to shore before we all die, okay? That's how dire this is. And anybody who doubts that that's the circumstance that we're currently living under, keep in mind that Skippy and all of his minions are planning to shut down the oil industry in 8 years. 2030 is right around the corner. The other thing everybody needs to keep in mind, and there's so much odious legislation coming out of both Edmonton and Ottawa these days, it's hard to keep track of it all, but there's a Senate Bill S-201, which is a companion bill to Senate Bill S-230, which is the bill that's going to establish the universal basic income for Canada. Now, for those of you that are worried about your children's future, the Universal Basic Income Bill provides the genius provision that if you're 17 years old, you're not in school, you have no intention of going to school, you have no ambition to take any vocational training, go to university, get a job, do anything with your life, hey, it doesn't matter. You can stay home and Skippy's gonna give you $2,000 a month. So think about that on a rolling forward basis. Now, also think about the companion bill, S-201. S-201, the plan there is to lower the voting age in Canada to the age of 16. So now, again, going back from prior to being a young lawyer, I hate to admit that if I were a 16-year-old and somebody told me that, hey, Jeff, if you vote for a Trudeau, next year when you turn 17, you can drop out of high school and the government's going to give you $2,000 a month to stay home, buy beer and muscle car parts. I hate to tell you how my 16-year-old self might have voted. We need to keep this in mind. And again, I'm making a bit of light of it because obviously on its face, all of this sounds so stupid as to be beyond belief, but this is actually these are Senate bills, right? And again, think about that. And again, Tanner does an excellent job talking about economics. Think about the economics of this country as every 17-year-old opts to stay home, drink beer and buy muscle car parts or whatever their hobbies happen to be, smoke pot and play Nintendo, as opposed to going to getting a job and bettering themselves for their future. We're not going to have a functioning economy within 5 or 10 years as we lose the lower end of our workforce to sheer stupidity, right? The other looming danger that we have is that we literally live in a country now where we are being governed by morons. And I mean this in a real sense. I mean, I was driving up to an APP rally not too long ago, and just for fun, because the day before I'd heard a Liberal on CPAC in the House of Commons bragging about how it was that he was involved in coming up with the Western Canadian Green Energy Plan. And he said, oh yeah, and he said, we've realized that there's nothing that we can't do with a barrel of canola oil that we can't do with a barrel of petroleum. And I'm going, okay, well, let's leaving aside the fact that, excuse my language, that's bullshit. But anyway, plastics, petroleum products, all of the things that we make out of oil besides gas and diesel. So leave all of that aside. I just thought, okay, well, I'll ask Mr. Google, just out of morbid curiosity, what the spot price of a barrel of canola oil is today. On that day, it was $1,018, right? So we have geniuses in Ottawa who claim to be governing for the national good, who think that the national economy and combines that are, producing food, tractors, and pickup trucks that are, running cattle and moving feed and everything else, all the agricultural goods that are being moved around by gas and diesel, at currently Putin prices, or I call it Biden prices of $117 a barrel, that we can afford to do all of that on $1,000 a barrel canola oil. I mean, it's beyond belief that these are the people that are dictating to Alberta how it is that, we are to live and how it is that we're to be governed. So again, from my perspective, when we talk about, and we hear Dennis Modry talking about all of us needing to paddle together to get to shore, the falls are upon us. And we all need to come together. We all need, as much as we can, please, I'm thrilled to see so many people out here, to support your local APP chapters. We're going to start getting volunteer committees together and getting things moving with regard to, getting the petition out more broadly to the populace. Our goal is to get at least 300 signatures on that petition to take to the Alberta legislature, even prior to the 2023 election, to force a referendum to be called. In my view, it should be held at the same time as the 2023 election, because this should be the only election issue. So with that, I would like to thank you all for being here today, and thank you for understanding the urgency of this, because we wouldn't be here on a Saturday. We all get it. And thank you. Please share this with your friends and neighbors. And again, Rob, thank you for all the work that you've done. You're a true Albertan, and we appreciate it. And we appreciate your involvement. And in fact, Rob, I would like to invite you to talk to Leighton and I and join the Constitutional Drafting Committee, because I think that's the next step, is we need to get an Alberta Constitution drafted so that we can take a look at what this is going to look like on a going forward basis. So thank you all for coming. It really is an honor to be able to speak to you. Thank you. Yeah. That's really humbling and really kind. Thank you all very much.